Thank you, Brittany. So I just want to welcome everyone. Welcome to our CAMA Digital Farm Show event. And I want to thank everyone for attending. So we're about to start things obviously here. My name is Ryan Hicks. I'm a board member on the Ontario chapter. And for those who maybe aren't familiar with CAMA, the Canadian Agri-Market Association, we're a nonprofit industry association with a volunteer board of directors. And our goal is to provide networking and knowledge and professional development opportunities for the community of professionals that support and promote agribusiness across Canada. So, excuse me, obviously we're a much different situation this year than what we normally are. If we were on site at the show right now, we'd be starting to gather in preparation for the annual event that we have. Mary Thornley, our executive director, would be starting her second glass of wine, and we would be ready to go, and things would be coming together. So she's gonna kill me for that. Anyhow, we are here gathered digitally instead, and we're looking to offer the same good content that we would in person, and this is going to be the next best thing. So we want to say thank you to Glacier Farm Media and Canada's Digital Farm Show, who's supported us for many years with this event, and obviously have continued that support with the event here today and hosting. And so we've got Doug and Brittany and others here supporting us, and we really appreciate that. So to start things off, I've got a handful of CAMA business items and announcements and reminders and things. So some announcements. CAMA has developed a new digital content for members called the CAMA Academy, which includes videos, blogs, and links to our previous webinars. Our professional development videos and blogs offer CAMA members the opportunity to learn from fellow members who are thought leaders within the industry. Videos and blogs can be uploaded to give members the opportunity to learn best practices regarding a variety of agri-food marketing topics. We encourage you to check them out at our website, cama.org. Best of CAMA is going virtual this year, and the entry deadline is fast approaching on September 25th. We are also looking for more judges to judge these great entries. And I invite you to please contact Mary Thornley if you are interested. The Best of CAMA webinar will be taking place on Wednesday, November 18th at 2 p.m. With the virtual Best of CAMA Awards event taking place on Thursday, November 19th at 2 p.m. Again, if you're looking for more information, visit the website there. I'd like to take a second here and turn things over to Faith Fullerton, who is the student chapter president at the university, and just want to give her the floor to share with us what they're doing in the chapter coming up.
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Faith Fullerton, and I am the 2020-2021 University of Guelph CAMA student chapter president. If you haven't heard of the student chapter or don't know what we do, we are a group of 10 to 15 University of Guelph ag students who develop a very in-depth marketing plan for an agricultural product, commodity or service not currently on the market. We normally travel to the US in mid-April to compete at the NAMA student competition. Here we compete against 30 other universities throughout North America. The Guelph team has had much success over the past 3 years, placing second 3 years ago, fourth 2 years ago, and won our heat last year. Due to COVID, our year is going to look a little bit different as we will not be able to travel to the NAMA competition to compete. Fingers crossed that NAMA moves forward with a virtual competition, but for right now, we're just not sure what the platform is going to be. But with saying that, we are still going to move ahead with the team this year as we feel that there are more benefits than not and do not want to lose our momentum of success from the past years. We feel there's a lot of value in going through the motions of a normal CAMA year so that our new members get a taste of what CAMA is all about. Right now, we are taking applications for new members, and once the team is picked, we will spend our time researching new and innovative products or foods. Right before the Christmas holidays, we will pick our product, and then from January to April, we will build a detailed marketing plan, work on a PowerPoint, create a professional executive summary, and practice. Since we did not travel to NAMA last year and we will not be traveling this year, we are not looking for sponsorship. But we would like to thank all of our generous sponsors who have made it possible in the past years to travel to the NAMA competition. I would also like to thank CAMA Ontario for their moral support and assistance every year in contributing to the team's success. We are hoping to have some sort of presentation, hopefully in March, for family and friends and industry professionals. So I hope you can join us. And also, if you have any product ideas or products in the work that we could use for our product this year, then we are open to ideas. Thanks.
Very cool. Thanks, Faith. Appreciate that. Okay, so now I'm going to take a second here and introduce our speaker for this afternoon. So I'd like to introduce Mike von Massel-Michael. Mike is Associate Professor at the University of Guelph and is the OAC Chair in the Food Systems Leadership. Mike has been an excellent advocate and resource for the industry, especially in recent months. Mike regularly acts as subject matter expert for various media outlets and is a main curator of the Food Focus podcast, which is intended to create conversation and provide perspective in the issues surrounding the food system in Canada. Speaking personally for a second, I find it very easy to get caught up in the daily proceedings of my role. When I think we all do that in the doing of the do. And I was thankful for the opportunity to sit in the session that Michael was a part of in the spring for 4-H. I think there was 400 members on the call that night, along with Senator Black, Rob Black, and Mike Barrett of Gay Lee. I think it was an excellent event. I commend East Gen and their team for putting that speaker series on, and the information shared was great perspective, the State of the Union and the food system and the pandemic in general. So I feel that the parents attending the event got just as much or more than the 4-Hers. It provided some great perspective. So we discussed that as a CAMA board, and we're very pleased that Mike agreed to join us today as part of this event to sort of further the conversation, share an update and some more perspective, now that we're at a somewhat a different stage of things in the pandemic. Again, it's easy for us, no matter our role, to be hyper-focused on our part in the whole system. And our hope today is to offer more of a grand perspective from someone whose role, perhaps Mike, is to have an eye on the horizon and provide that view for us a bit. So before we begin, I just want the housekeeping stuff. Mike will be available to answer questions. Ask that you use the questions section or the chat section, preferably the Q&A section. We'll keep tabs on things as we go here. If Mike, I hope you don't mind, if there's something that's relevant and timely, I'll maybe lob it at you if you're okay. Otherwise, we'll save them to the end and we'll go from there. I'll turn things over to you, Mike.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And before I've got a few slides that I'm going to share. And before I do that, I'm going to add a little bit to the introduction. One of my most important roles, I would say, is as faculty advisor for the student chapter of CAMA. And I'm going to echo Faith's sort of casting out a net for products. It not only helps out students, I would argue, these students do a substantial deep dive on marketing strategy. And I won't necessarily argue that you can take their executive summary and execute it, but I think that there's a high degree of likelihood that you'll get some ideas out of it, something that you say, oh, we haven't thought of that. And the work these students do in preparation, I think, is amazing. So if you do have something that you'd like someone to explore, I think there's not only benefit to the students, there's benefit to you as an organization as well. So reach out to Faith or to me, and we'd be happy to have a conversation. So as I'm going to transition now to the presentation, to give you a couple of slides, because otherwise you're going to have to look at the glare off my forehead for the next hour, and I'd much rather show you some slides here. So what I was asked maybe to give an overview is to say what's happened in the short run, take a look back, what's going to happen in the medium run, and then take a even bigger step back and say, are there some things that that independent of COVID, we should be thinking about as an industry? And I'm, excuse me, I'm going to sort of focus quite a bit at the consumer end of the food chain, because you can't push a chain, and they're really driving where things are changing. But I'm going to try and bring it back to some of the things that are relevant to you as companies and to others in the industry, including farmers. So let's. I think the first thing that's important to take a breath is we hear all of this dire, things are going off the rails, and we've had some issues in supply chains, discussions about whether the US was going to allow masks to come into the country and other PPE, and there have been some industries that have been hurt substantially. What I think we can all take a deep breath and say, it's remarkable how our food system, from input suppliers to farmers to processors to retailers, have weathered this storm. The food system has been robust and resilient, and it's been, for the most part, really good news. Now, we've had some things, and we'll talk about those, but I think we should sort of give ourselves all a pat on the back to say that the system bent but didn't break, and that's remarkable under the circumstances, that this food system that often gets criticized did as well as it did. We had minimal interruptions in food supply. Some of those interruptions were demand-based interruptions rather than supply-based interruptions. It wasn't that we were running out of things. It was that we had these logistical issues within the supply chain that we had to work out, and we worked them out. And in fact, we worked them out in Canada in many ways better than some other countries for a variety of reasons. And we've had minimal price appreciation as well. There have been some increases in price. We've seen some things. Beef went up a little bit when we had some processing shutdowns, and we've seen some other things, probably partly COVID related, but also probably related to some other seasonal factors. I would argue that wildfires on the west coast of the US will maybe have a bigger impact on food prices in Canada than COVID did. And those things remain to be seen. And I think, if you look, many people, and the unfortunate thing is that restaurants have been closed. Many people are actually paying less money for food because they're eating out less than they were before. So overall, the food system has done very well. The production level has adapted very well. Disruption, frankly, was relatively minimal on most farms. I mean, we need to talk a little bit about sort of, some of the disruptions we had in the labor-intensive fruit and vegetable sectors in the spring. Remains to be seen if those continue in the fall. My guess is they'll be less significant because we put in protocols to manage it. And I actually had, and many of the CAMA members might not like hearing this, but I actually had a couple of farmers that I talked to say, life is actually pretty good. We got less people pulling into the laneway, and frankly, we've been social distancing for 100 years, and so while there have been some bumps in the road, overall, I think things have gone relatively smoothly. I think it's also important to say some of the issues that we've seen over the summer aren't solely COVID related, and it's important to differentiate because we have to think about which effects are transient versus some that are more substantial changes in the market structure. And I think that it's easy to say COVID, but some of these things have less to do with COVID and more to do with other market circumstances. And then let's take a look at what happens going forward. What does normal look like going forward in the food and ag system? So how has COVID challenged the food system? Well, we saw some short-term adjustments. I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about those and what it's meant. And it's exposed some vulnerabilities in the supply chain. So as I said, we bent but didn't break. And there's some things that I think as we emerge from COVID that we need to talk about a little bit more. First is processing. We've seen it in meat processing. It's probably true in any food processing sector, and we've seen some plants have issues, and the lack of processing and the concentration in processing is an issue in Canada especially. And then, as I said earlier, with things like the asparagus farms and stuff, labor is not a new issue for agriculture. COVID just made it a more acute issue, and then thinking about how we move forward. So what happened? Well, as I said, these are demand-based changes, demand-based shocks to the system. And I think it's an important distinction. I spend a lot of time talking to consumers and to media saying, this isn't a supply issue, this is a demand issue, and that means we will adapt to it, and for the most part, adapted relatively quickly. What happened is restaurants and food service closed, bang, like that. What was it, on the 16th of March, we went from full on to almost everybody closed. I was speaking to the president of a food service group the other day, and he said they made the decision and closed, and then had a long list of things they had to do to close. They've slowly reopened, and we're seeing that happen. But that not only changes where we eat, right? We spend about before COVID, we spent almost a third of our food dollar on food prepared outside of the home. All of a sudden, that option was gone. So it meant that food had to be we had to get it from somewhere else. But it also changes the quantity and types of foods demanded. So it's not just, oh, we've got to get all that stuff from restaurants to retail. We eat far fewer chicken wings, as an example, at home than we do than we do in restaurants. We eat more cheese in restaurants, think pizza, than we do at home, although I'm a big fan of cheese. We drink more fluid milk at home than we do in restaurants. So it's not only just we had to shift everything, but there were some shifts in the nature of that demand. I was talking to a turkey producer the other day, and the fact that schools were closed and people weren't taking lunches to work anymore, demand for lunch meat went down. And while we probably still were doing it, we were eating different lunches at home. So we still ate. Overall, demand at retail went up, but we needed to sort of shift where things came from. And it meant that there was a huge surge in demand at retail. Part of that was panic buying. We had the people saying, well, we don't know if stores are going to be open. We don't know what's going on that way. So we saw this huge peak in demand of non-perishable items. And then we saw it flatten out, but demand was going to be higher anyway. I'll show you a graph in a second. The demand is going to be higher anyway because we were used to be spending a third of our dollar in restaurants. We couldn't anymore. So we were clearly going to buy more at retail. And then there were some changes in buying patterns. Some differences from restaurant to retail, in addition to the product form that I've already talked about, is those distribution channels are distinct. And they're often distinct even at the processor level, so that some processors are focused on the food service sector versus on the retail sector. So we had to coordinate sort of shifting not only different products, but just shifting those products over. Places like Cisco and Gordon Food Service, which are exclusively delivering to restaurants, all of a sudden had this inventory that nobody was buying, that they had to sort of find another home for. But not only that, all of a sudden demand was much higher at retail, and we had to get that product there. We not only had to make that product, put it in the right packaging. Tim Hortons doesn't buy bags of 4 liters of milk. They buy either really big bags of milk that go into their milk dispensing machines, or they buy little creamers that go into the bags to the drive-through. And so we had to put it into different packaging. We had to make sure we had to order that packaging, we had to shift it. I spoke to the president of Gordon Food Service, and he said the only thing that was busy in those early days was their trucks, because they got on the phone with Loblaws and Sobeys and said, if you need help moving that additional volume, we can help you do that. And so it's all of these moving parts that when things are going smoothly, we don't think about, but that we had to adapt when that shock happened. And that's why we had shortages. And that's why we were, the irony we had how can we possibly be dumping milk at the same time as we don't have milk in the grocery store? That was a short-term change. As we moved it to different processors, we put it in different forms, and we put it into different packaging, and we adjusted where it was going. Very quickly, those adjustments happened. But because they were demand-based, coordination, these are perishable products in many cases. We do a just-in-time system. It took us a while to adapt. There wasn't a lot of buffer inventory in the system. We did adjust. The shortages were demand-based, and then things sorted out. The supply chain relationships, vertical integration, so industries that were vertically integrated had some buffering because they didn't have to readjust. They did things internally. I would argue that the central desk selling buffered this somewhat too. If you look at, as an example, Wisconsin, which produces milk primarily for cheese, the demand for cheese the bottom fell out of the demand for cheese in Wisconsin. And so all those plants in Wisconsin had no demand. They stopped buying milk. Milk got dumped. And it took them much longer to recover because those individual farmers had to find someone else to buy that milk. And that milk wasn't processed in Wisconsin. So it took, whereas in Canada, where we have DFO or Manitoba dairy producers, they're selling to all the processors, so they really just had to adjust where those trucks were going. And you can see Stats Canada hasn't released anything close, more recent than April, but you can see, Easter holiday, things go up, Thanksgiving holiday, things go up. And this peak here, March 13th, was when things sort of started to shut down. All of a sudden, weekly sales of groceries were up 50%. That's the panic buying. That's people running out of toilet paper, right? Stocking up and filling their pantries. And then we see these 2 weeks here where things flattened out a little bit in that 10 to 20% range. And my expectation is that we've seen this go back and forth here in that 10 to 20% range, which replaces food service. And then in July, as restaurants started to open again, probably is down around 8 or 10%. Restaurant volumes are up, but they're not up to the same level as they were before. And it remains to be seen if they get up that high. So I mean, if you had no matter what business you're in, if you had an unanticipated surge in demand that increased your weekly demand by 50%, you might take a day or two to adjust as well. Just some things, here, 300% increase in the purchase of rice. That's stockpiling, right? And it disappeared very quickly. It was still high. I think we started seeing people burn through inventories. It didn't get negative except for infant formula. So people weren't depleting their inventories, but they weren't building them any higher. And the last graph I'm going to show you is sort of a shift in demand. I'm one of those crazy people who started baking in lockdown. So I'm buying more flour than I ever have because I'm baking bread, and my wife argues way too many cookies and brownies and things like that as well as a distraction. But you can see that happened, and flour demand stayed up by close to 100%. And that's probably constrained because we had shortages of flour because we didn't have any bags to put it in. And so flour demand stayed well above sort of what you would have expected if we were just seeing demand based on a move from restaurants, that means people were just buying more of it because they were baking more. You know, if you look at eggs and other baking, butter and margarine weren't up as much because a smaller proportion of those go into baking, and so the change was a bit smaller. But that really reflects sort of a fundamental change in demand. Usually demand for flour in the summer is lower than in the winter because we're all outside barbecuing. No one wants to have a hot oven on in the house, but that changed even though it was a hot summer. So how do we respond to some of those things? I mean, we're getting lots of people saying, is the just-in-time system the right approach? You know, should we be building some additional inventories in the system? We clearly, because of the, you know, we weren't out of wheat, right? Wheat's produced on an annual cycle. We had lots of hard wheat to make flour. We just didn't have a lot of flour. Should we be building inventories of milled flour? Should we be building inventories of flour in bags? That becomes a question. That would have protected us to some of those surges, but if we do that, costs go up. Inventory costs you money. We have a perishable product. Spoilage will cost you money. And so we have these trade-offs to say, we ran short here in the system. Should we be building more? Should we be building more inventories further up the supply chain rather than just at the farm or the elevator level where that wheat was in the case of flour? That's a question I think that we are going to continue to be asking about. Where will inventories go in the future and how should we be doing it? We have the challenge that this is in many cases, it's a perishable product, so we can't build inventories too big, but balancing the cost and food security with predictability becomes an important consideration. In the short term, we've seen a narrower range of choices. We've seen some product SKUs come off the shelf as companies said, we've got to catch up to this demand. We're going to focus on our core products. We've heard you know, I heard some uproar a few weeks ago as Ragu had exited the Canadian market. And there was, oh, you know, it's the end of the world, especially Ragu. University students especially like Ragu because it was a little cheaper than some of the other choices. Well, the truth is, if Ragu had really been on a growth spurt beforehand, they wouldn't have exited the market. This just became a convenient time for them to exit the market. We saw, I mean, when flour came back on the shelf, we saw the all-purpose flours and the white flours available, and maybe some of the specialty flours less available as companies said we got to fulfill. The question becomes, is that going to be a strategy to build resilience into the system? My guess is not, but we'll get to that a little bit more. And then I think fundamentally we need to ask, is the status quo really that bad? Right? The system bent, but it didn't break. We did a really good job of delivering. We've, for the most part, caught up. The last time I was in the grocery store, the odd shelf was empty as we sort of manage demand. You know, as overall demand is higher, if things come on specific days, you might run short. I think some companies have had some short-term shortages, but overall, we've done pretty well. You know, if you take a step back and say, should we build more resilience into the system, then we'll build more cost into the system, then we accentuate food insecurity. You know, and one of the sort of silent things that have happened in the COVID is that even though prices haven't gone up substantially, food insecurity has gone up substantially because people have lost income, right? We had 3 million Canadians lose their jobs. And if we build more cost into the system, do we make more people food insecure? So I think, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and say the system has worked relatively well. There are some tweaks that we can look at and that I think we'll see going forward, but overall we've done reasonably well. And should be careful in rushing to change. And I think It's important to acknowledge that there have been some non-COVID challenges too. We've heard, for example, grain farmers say we're under a lot of pressure because of low prices. To a degree, that's been driven by a decreased demand for ethanol, and COVID has driven that to a degree. I'm no longer commuting to Guelph every day. I mean, there's much less air travel, there's much less ground travel. That's coming back somewhat, so demand has gone down. But fundamentally, high production is an issue too. We've got a war for share on the international market, and when oil prices are low, ethanol prices are low, and grain prices are low, that might be longer term and not just related to COVID, relative to ethanol. And so rather than thinking about short-term things, in that case, we might need to think about how we're going to make long-term adjustments in the marketplace. I think there are also some opportunities out there. Meeting demand means growth, and it means making good choices. I talk about starting baking. There is a small little flour miller who is within about 10 kilometers of my house, whose demand went up 3,000% since COVID came. And I had a conversation with her, and she said she turned some business down, saying some retailers, she thought, I'm not going to be a long-term customer of that. I'm not going to be a long-term supplier for that retailer. So I'm going to supply the people who I'm going to have a long-term relationship with, who I'll keep. And they're doing also a lot of direct-to-consumer stuff. So those people who did a good job managed to grow, and I think we've seen some of that. Shorter supply chains is also something we've seen. I think that there's been a call for localization. I think we need to be a little bit careful in being too, there's nothing wrong with supporting local Canadian, local Ontario businesses, and I think that becomes profoundly important and is good, but we shouldn't just say, well, we should be producing everything here in Canada, because we export a significant volume of our egg production in this country, and if everyone went all local, that would hurt us. It's also important to remember that although you can find oranges at the St. Jacobs Market, we don't grow a lot of oranges on the banks of the Grand River, last time I checked, and we're going to continue to need to import products, not least because we don't produce them here, but also because we have this thing called winter, and we like fresh produce, and it's nice to get fresh produce in the winter. So I think there'll be some localization, but I also think there's shorter supply chains. That flour producer who I can order directly from, and I think that this is going to start making the retailers a bit nervous, because we're buying more stuff online, and so we might still be able to go to our retailer, but the transaction cost of going online and order something direct from that small producer is relatively low. We've also figured out for non-perishable items that we can do delivery easily. You know, I can order beer from my favorite microbrewery and get it delivered to my doorstep the next day for less than $5 is remarkable to me, and it's easy, and it probably means long term that I will buy less beer at the beer store or the liquor store. And the fact that I order online from my flour supplier probably means I will buy less flour long term from the retail store. So those shorter supply chains, building e-commerce platforms, while they're not going to take over the marketplace, are going to become an important player in filling consumer needs. So let's shift gears quickly here. I don't want to take too much time to give opportunity for questions, but let's talk a little bit about vulnerabilities in the supply chain. We've heard for a long time that labor is an issue in agriculture. Labor is an issue in agriculture, in production agriculture. Labor is an issue in processing. In February, I met with a large food processor in the GTA who said, I need more people. They don't need laborers, they need people with technical skills. They need and they need people who can do good supply chain, they can do forecast. We've got a shortage, and COVID made it more acute. It's often international labor. That's true not only on farms, but in the issues in meat processing that we saw. We have to develop these safety protocols. But this might, in this case, the shortages were driven by COVID. But you know, if God forbid a hurricane wiped out Jamaica, that would affect the availability of our temporary foreign workers as substantially as COVID did. And we need to think about this. Are there ways we can engage Canadians? It's not easy. Those jobs are hard. You know, we heard lots of people, well, damn, all of these students who are doing nothing this summer, we should put them on farms. Well, these aren't unskilled labor positions. You need people who know what they're doing. And frankly, they're tough. So we have some people who don't want to do them. And the people who are unemployed are sitting in different places than the fields that need to be either planted or picked. And getting people there becomes an issue. So I think we'll see over time some more automation. And that's true not only on the farm, but it's also true in processing. I wanted to just take a second, if I may, to talk a little bit about, you know, people are saying, is meat packing inherently unsafe? Is food processing inherently unsafe in a pandemic? And it's nothing to do with processing of foods per se, although maybe the cool atmosphere in some of these facilities might play a role. That's not yet clear. It's the fact that these are low automation systems with lots of people close together, not only on the floor of the plant, but in the lunchroom, in the change room, and frequently on the bus coming to and from work, because these people live urban and work rural, and the companies, in order to get enough people to work there, have to provide buses for these people to go back and forth. So it has nothing to do inherently with the way we process food, but the fact that these are labor-intensive operations. The other thing we have to think about is the high degree of concentration in processing. Meat processing, but in lots of other places, plants closed due to worker illness. And I talked about it, large groups of people in close proximity. We seem to have built safety protocols that you know, with barriers and with PPE and all of those things. We haven't seen a whole lot of new outbreaks. We've seen the odd one. We've got people rethinking processes. I think as new plants are built, we'll probably see some modularization so that we don't have the whole plant go down if we have an issue in one part of it. But I think we'll see a real drive to diversify packing capacity and processing capacity. Now, that's easier said than done. When that cow hit, we saw a lot of beef processing plants open up and then close because it's hard to compete. These huge, quote unquote, big plants that we have in Western Canada are small in a North American context. And so we have to be competitive. And I'll talk about some things that might make smaller processing plants more competitive in the long run in a second. But so doing it in a smart way, but not only packing capacity, but processing capacity, I think becomes important. We'll see some increases in automation. And, you know, it's hard in some, you know, harvesting technology has been difficult because these products are often fragile. If you go into a packing plant, often the further processing is automated to a degree. I've been in the Cargill plant in Calgary or south of Calgary, and the machines that make McDonald's burgers are really cool, and they do that automated. But because we have different sized carcasses, different breeds, that's really hard to automate. You know, not only where you make the cut, but all of those sorts of things. But I think we'll see an increased drive in automation. And frankly, I think folks like you will be marketing based on workers' conditions. I think, you know, we've seen companies talk about animal welfare. We've seen companies talk about emission and things like that. I think we'll start seeing some companies talk about, look, we have safety protocols, we treat our people well, and that will become part of some of these brands. And I've had some initial conversation with some of these companies anyway, saying, how can we do this what might we do, and that will be interesting to see to come. So in the longer term, I already talked about, I think we're going to see more direct to consumer. That means different skills will be needed for different players. Companies will have to have the ability to think a little bit differently. It means we'll be recruiting different kinds of people. It means that people who are in the marketing game will need to support a different, perhaps communicating to a different kind of customer as well. I think we'll see differences in supply chain relationships. I think we'll see some evolution of greater integration. Agriculture has historically really focused on commodities, and I think we're seeing in the long term demand for different types of products, which will create an opportunity for smaller processors because there'll be unique products, but it'll also be able to mean that we can stabilize some of these supply chains and some of these supply chain relationships. And for producers, that means probably some price stability because they won't leave you for 2 cents. I had a conversation last year with a large potato producer in Manitoba who was dealing with a US company on organic potatoes, and they had their own brand. And he said, that company is coming to us and says, will you put the organic potatoes in our bags? What do you think? And I said, well, you have to make your own choice. Are they going to go buy it from someone else if you don't do it? But if that is in your bag and that customer understands that it's your bag and that is the kind of potatoes they like, it is much more difficult for that retailer to leave you for a couple of pennies, right? If you look at President's Choice organic potatoes, sometimes they say these potatoes were produced in China, and sometimes they're produced in Canada. They can go wherever it's cheap because it's their brand. So specificity, products that are made with specific attributes or produced with specific attributes means you anchor that value chain where that production occurs. And it means we get greater stability in those relationships. I think that's a good thing. It means we're probably increasing revenues. Yes, we differentiate, but I think that that's going to continue to come. And we already talked about increased buffer capacity along the supply chain. I expect that some companies will start building some inventories, although I don't think everyone will, and I don't think everybody should. Let's talk for a second now about food service. The comeback will be slow. Some restaurants will do better than others. I think I told you I had a conversation the other day with the president of a regional chain, and he said that he believes there's still a reckoning coming. That the wage subsidy and CERB and the rental subsidy got a few people through. That debt has gone up, and when patio season is over, some of these places are going to feel a lot of pain. So that there's and it's probably not just true in food service, but that many of these restaurants will not open, and those that reopen may close. We saw lots of people doing pickup, and that was great. Allowed us to get some pickup, and we felt like we were doing something. Some of these restaurants actually were better off being closed than they were doing takeout, just based on the volumes that they were doing. So I think we'll see, and if there's further shutdowns, as we see numbers climb, food service isn't going to be back right away. It's probably going to take a couple of years for us to get back to the kinds of food service demands that we were at before COVID. And I think the experience will be different. I haven't eaten inside yet. I've been out on several patios. Fewer people. Dining times are longer. They have fewer people in the kitchen, so they have usually a smaller menu because they have fewer people in the kitchen, and it allows them to do that more efficiently. So we might not even have the same experience sitting in, right? And even if I felt safe sitting in, part of the experience of eating out is the atmosphere, and will it be as much fun with plastic in between dividers between the tables and that sort of thing. I think inevitably prices are going to go up. It is going to cost more to go out, which will also mean we will go out less. Fewer people, more PPE protocols, capacity is lower, not only because we can have fewer tables, but because it takes longer to serve a customer. Restaurants that don't raise their prices will go out of business. And we'll see increased specialization. I think we'll see these ghost kitchens, which are built specifically for takeout outside of prime locations, so they'll pay lower rent, and they'll cluster so that you'll have a Mexican and an Italian and a, you know, so on and so on, clustered together, and then they will coordinate delivery so that they can achieve a critical mass for delivery. We'll still have dine-in restaurants. I think restaurants that try and do both, there will be some, but that it'll be tough to do both, that you will see restaurants do one or the other. In retail, we'll see an increase in online with or without delivery. If you look at the news nowadays, you would think that it's absolutely taking over the market. The online market for groceries was at about 2% pre-COVID. It's probably climbed to 6 or 7% now. And so we've accelerated the process, but people are still going to want to go into grocery stores, but the online experience is different. There's changes in the product mix. There are fewer impulse buys because you go buy the thing, you know, if you've ever used one of those apps, it says this is what you bought before, do you want to buy it again? You click it all again and you're done. And so, although I did talk to a company that did online delivery, and they said they've seen a dramatic drop in things like potato chips, but people were still finding ice cream. So we're not giving up on indulgences all entirely. And I think it continues to highlight the opportunity for non-traditional retail, because if you're shopping online, my mother used to shop in 3 different grocery stores in Fergus because she was retired and she was cheap, and she would go buy what was on special, and the opportunity cost of her time was relatively low. I don't go shopping at 3 different grocery stores to save a couple of pennies, but I might click on a different website to either save a few pennies or to find exactly what I'm looking for. So that online, I think, also gives opportunities for non-traditional retail. I talked earlier about variety going down. I think that is a short-term temporary supply response based on the demand conditions, and I expect that variety will continue to go up. It's not that you and I all want more choice, it's that you and I want different things. And so grocery stores need to balance giving enough choice with having sufficient turns on the inventory. So there, you know, I'm going to sound like a grumpy old guy, but you know, there was much less product on the shelves when I was younger than there is today, and I think that's only going to become more. It's only going to happen more. I heard it said. I read a book the other day that we are going to buy less of more things, and I think that's really defines what the food market's going to go look like. And that becomes a greater opportunity for specialized production, where we have these specific value chains and products that are differentiated on a variety of attributes. So before I wrap up, I'm pretty close to on time. Let's look at some big picture trends that are maybe independent of COVID. The first is the rise of the vegetable. We've heard a lot in the last year about plant-based proteins. And I'm not talking about plant-based proteins here. I'm talking about the fact that we are going to eat less protein. We probably, if you look at what is most significantly going to affect the demand for meat, is not Beyond Meat. It's the fact that people like me are being told to eat less meat. And if you look in restaurants and if you look in other places, if you look at a plate, that protein is a smaller part of that plate than it used to be. And so I think that that's going to continue, and it will be an important part of sort of balancing the shelves in grocery stores and at restaurants. I don't think that that means a reduction in the total production of meat in Canada or in North America. In fact, I think that there will continue to be export opportunities, notwithstanding China and our pork, although they're taking pork again, that we will see substantial growth and demand for proteins produced in Canada. There would just be less of it on Canadian plates. I already talked about consumers buying less of more things. There needs to be a market. COVID temporarily reversed this, but fundamentally, I think there will continue to be more choice. It will change how grocery stores are laid out. Right now, grocery stores are laid out to a significant degree based on products. And what we want is people to go up and down every aisle. The way we make more is to sell a bigger basket to that customer. By the way, the online basket is on average 1.4 times the size of the in-store basket. But we want more people. But as choice proliferates, we're seeing some stores start to create aisles for customers where you might see similar products that are in other parts of the store on a shelf that is designed to make it easy for that customer to find it. So I think we'll see some changes coming that way. And finally, it's building resilience, both at a system level and a firm level. And that's not just talking about COVID, that's talking about, if you would have asked me a year ago, what is the biggest risk the food system faces, I would have probably said a global pandemic, but African swine flu and not COVID. And so we need to think about, with climate change and other things, I think risk is going up, and building resilience will become an important factor for players at all stages of the value chain. So that's quickly what I wanted to cover. Before I turn it back to the folks who are going to help us manage questions, I'm going to do a little bit of shameless self-promotion. This is my email address if you'd like to get a hold of me, if you have a question afterwards, or if you have an idea, if you have a product that you'd like us to do in CAMA, feel free to email me. I'm active on Twitter, talking about food things all of the time, and we have a blog and podcast called foodfocusedguelph.ca where we talk to people in the industry and have discussions about things that we think are worth talking about. So I'm about 2 minutes over what I was to do, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mike,
So-
I have one question right now. There's lots of talk about having a second wave possibly hitting us. What do you think that would do to the food system? In other words, we've had the COVID experience and all the things you talked about, and did we learn some things that will mitigate what may happen in case of a second wave?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think we learned some lessons and we've done some changes. And so I also think things will be less of a surprise. So, if dining in restaurants goes away, or inside dining goes away because cases continue to go up, that's not going to be as substantially disruptive as it was the first time. A, it's not going to be as big a volume. B, we've been through it before. So I think we've seen the worst of the disruptions in the rearview mirrors. And if cases go up again, we've made adaptations in grocery stores. So we're wearing masks and most of us are following the arrows or are doing the phone-in orders and picking orders. We've developed systems that I think that will be robust if COVID returns. I think also at the processing level, even plants that didn't have issues have now built protocols and increased separation and put in barriers so that the risk of processing plants shutting down if a second wave comes is much lower than it was before. So we're all hoping that we don't have a second wave. But if a second wave comes, I think that the food system will perform even better than it did the first time.
So if I can jump in there, Mike, I guess are you noticing any gaps with consumer perception right now, or so what should, as a collective, what should we be saying to consumers right now, in your opinion?
Well, I think we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to engage with consumers right now. We have never had people pay more attention to food than they have in the last 6 months, right? You know, there's nothing like the scare of some scarcity. I was counting the other day. I have done 250 media interviews since the middle of March. We have this opportunity to tell the story. And Canadian agriculture has a profoundly good story to tell. And so I think we have an opportunity to engage and to have a conversation. And the student wants, and I don't know if she ripped this quote off or if she came up with it, so I don't know who to attribute it to, said a conversation can't be two monologues. And I think as agriculture, we have to be willing to listen. And there are going to be some things that we do in agriculture that consumers aren't going to be happy with. And in some cases, we're going to have to say, okay, we won't do those anymore and we'll make changes. And we've seen sort of an evolution of animal welfare standards as an example. And we've seen an evolution in antibiotic use, and we will continue to see an evolution, I expect, in pesticide use and some of those things. But if we talk about why we're using, how they're using them, you know, our evidence suggests that if we talk about regulation and talk about why we're using it, that we can make good progress. And then when consumers say, well, you know what, I understand what you're doing, I don't like it, well, then we have to decide if that customer is worth having, or if we're going to create a niche where we provide what they want. So I think we haven't seen people shy away. If anything, things like you know, salmonella on onions and in the winter on romaine lettuce have made people more focused on Canadian than they've ever been. And if we tell our story, if we engage, listen and speak, we'll do really well.
Cool. Brittany, you say uncle there if we're going too long. I guess another question I have for you, Mike, is this kitchen renaissance that we all have and that you've shared with. I mean, you're taking this stuff serious. If you're going to direct supplier with your flour there, how long lived do you think that is? Has it been behavior changing for us as a society? Or if, say, things get more back to the way they used to be from a restaurant standpoint, and I guess I'm asking from the perspective of, yes, we've had packaging changes and end play changes on certain things. How long lived do you think the kitchen renaissance is?
I think that some of it will stick, right? So we've seen a real peak. We're probably already seeing fewer people bake as they get tired of it. But I think for some of it will stick. It's the same with online ordering. We've seen it accelerate when people feel comfortable going back into the grocery store. I think we'll see it bounce back a little bit, but not back to where it was before. Because for some people, they said, hey, this worked out all right. I was a little bit worried about the quality of the produce I was going to get. So I think some of these things will stick, but we'll see bounce back on some of them as well. So if you look, will as many people bake bread next summer as they did this summer? Probably not. Will some people who never baked bread before continue to bake bread? Yes, for sure. I think without a doubt. So we'll see some regression to the mean, but not all the way back to where it was before. So some of these changes are permanent.
Yeah, and I mean, again, in the context of localization and that sort of thing, you're alluded to more local butcher shops and that sort of stuff. And I guess to me, there's a curiosity if we have the capacity to make those changes, you know, from an food inspection standpoint or that sort of thing as well, right? Like it's going to be really interesting the next few years to see the new dynamics and the lesser of more in all ways.
It does make it interesting, and I think I just saw a question on the Q&A asked: is the value of made in Canada long term? And I think it will make people think about where they got. And you know, I started buying. I can get flour at the grocery store all the time. I like the fact that I can email Melissa, who runs the business, who I know, and say I'm actually buying, believe it or not, 20-kilo bags of flour. I'm hardcore, and I can run and pick it up. For me, it's relatively close and convenient. They'd ship it to people. They were telling people from Toronto they didn't want that many people coming to the farm gate because of the risk of getting sick. But some of those things are going to stick. I like the fact that I can get it locally. I like the fact that I can phone her up and say, this is what I need, and I can get it. So for me, that's going to stick. For other people, it isn't. I think there will be a segment of customers who will say, it is important for me to buy Canadian. Will be people delivering that message. And I think we will see a strengthening of the Canadian brand, not only because of the worry about will we be able to access it, but because of some of these food safety issues that we've had. You know, also shorter supply chains, smaller batches are also easier to manage with shorter distances traveled. So I think, you know, we're still going to eat bananas. We're still going to eat avocados. You know, I still like making guacamole. I'm comfortable with some of these things, but there are people for whom made in Canada became more important, and that's going to stick. There will be people who go back as we get to winter to eating things, things that are imported as we get out of the Canada season. I think that the incentive might go down, but fundamentally we will. This has been good for brand Canada food.
Okay. Brittany, do we have time for one more question?
I'd say just one more and then we can wrap up there.
All right, just quickly, you spoke about the increase in technology. What's that going to do to the consumer as far as concerns or worries about safety? Is that just simply a communication thing on our part as far as the growers and processors?
The first thing is you can't communicate your way. You can't communicate your way out of a bad system. So the first thing is execution. Okay. And so if we automate more, we have to do it in a way that is safe, and we have to ensure that we continue to meet the high expectation of Canadian consumers. One of my favorite quotes ever when I worked in marketing communications was, nothing kills a bad product like great advertising, right? If we can't deliver, so execution is the most important thing. So as we automate, we still not only have to deliver safe products, but we have to deliver the quality that people want. One of the reasons we haven't automated is, you know, because we don't want to bruise fresh produce and those sorts of things. So if we can do it in a way that delivers to customers' expectations, and we communicate why we're doing it, I think people are going to be happy. And so first step is execution. Second step is communication.
Thank you. Okay. Brittany, does that pretty much wrap it up as far as we're concerned?
Yep, I think we got the questions there from the audience, and you can go over and wrap it up here. All
right. Well, Mike, first of all, thanks so much for giving of your time. You're a big fan of CAMA and the student chapter and agriculture, and we're really glad that you were able to join us today in your presentation. Those out there, Mike has chosen to accept a membership to our CAMA chapter. So we are really looking forward to having Mike as a new member within CAMA and to bring his expertise and enthusiasm to our chapter. Thanks very much, Mike. Great job.
Well, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.